Great. Welcome to Senate Education on this is Tuesday, January 24th, 1:29 p.m. We're going to start our day by spending some time really jumping into the governor's proposal for school safety. After that, we're going to hear from the State Board of Education, and the Secretary of State, Sarah Copeland-Hanses, will be in to talk about civic education. And then we'll wrap things up with Act 72, an overview, and that's the school facilities bill that we passed a couple of years ago. We'll be back into school construction. These are just some highlights tomorrow with the our federal delegation, maybe more than one, hopefully. We've got one here now, and I think Katie's still waiting to hear from others. And State Treasurer's Office will be in. And then on Thursday, we're spending a chunk of time on career technical education. Friday, St. John's Berry Academy and teacher evaluations. Those are a little bit of the highlights. Ms. St. James, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. You have the administration's language, I believe, for a proposal, and I asked you, I believe, to draft it into possible either Brian Campion bill, committee bill, however we might use it. And I don't know if Hayden has a copy of it in front of us or not. Great. Okay, so it's in our packet testimony. So with that, we're looking at draft 1.1, introduced by the Committee on Education, if we so choose to do so. And the subject is education, school safety. Again, this is the administration's proposal, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. As Chair Campion mentioned, this is language that the administration is proposing. I've put it into our drafting format. I formatted it as a committee bill, but again, as Chair Campion said, we can reformat that depending on the committee's pleasure. This is the agency's language. I have not provided really any edits or anything, with the exception of some technical things, and I'll point them out. But this is language from the agency just put into our drafting form. So it begins with amending section, and what we're doing now is this is your first walkthrough. Is it your first walkthrough?
Our first walkthrough.
Okay.
We've gotten high level, hey, here's some language, but this is, I'd like a walkthrough.
Sure. So when we do the walkthrough, it's really the committee's pleasure on how detailed and granular I get. This is an easy one to walk through. I'm just giving you kind of a broad overview. But so I'm just going to start by orienting you to where this language will live, or is proposed to live. So you can see section 1 there. You've got 16 VSA, section 1481 is amended to read. So we know we're in Title 16, right? Your education green book that I'm always going to come here with. And then section 1481, that section lives in chapter 33 of Title 16, which is the fire and emergency preparedness drills and safety patrols chapter. It is a very thin chapter. There are only 3 sections right now. This bill proposes to amend one of them and then add 3 additional sections to that chapter. So the first proposal is to amend section 1481, which is currently in your green book. Any language that you see that's crossed out is current law, and the proposal is to strike it, to get rid of it, to delete it, to change it somehow. And any language you see that is underlined is new language. That's the proposal that's being added. And any language you see that is neither underlined nor struck is just the law. And there's no, the draft you have in front of you wouldn't propose any changes to that language. So you can see we're starting with subsection A on page 1, line 14. The recommendation here is to strike the language in the current language in section A, subsection A, and replace it with, starting on line 18, a requirement that each supervisory union or supervisory district that operates a school shall adopt a policy mandating each school site to conduct an options-based response drill each year in the fall and spring of the academic year. We're on page 2. The policy shall require that drills be conducted following the template developed by the Vermont School Safety Center jointly with the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, and a superintendent shall report completion of the biannual drills to AOE in a format approved by the secretary.
Senator Hashim.
Can you provide a definition for what options-based response is?
That is a great question. I cannot provide that definition.
Or is that for a future witness?
I encourage you to ask a future witness about that. It is not currently defined in Title 16.
Okay.
And it was not included in the language provided by AOE.
Senator Bullock.
I'm wondering if I should ask this or not.
Please.
Does this change, is it also for our academies?
That's subsection B.
Okay.
So on page 2, starting on line 6, we're going to strike out everything that's in current law in subsection B and replace it with underlined language starting on line 11. And that it's basically the same requirement for approved and recognized independent schools. And then you'll see at the very bottom of page 2, starting on line 18, subsection C, that language is neither struck nor underlined. So that's current law, and the proposal is to keep that.
Just out of curiosity, going back up to line 12, is there a different vehicle that covers universities? You know, different state-run universities. Is there a reason why universities and colleges are exempt?
I believe because this language is meant to apply to K through 12 or pre-K through 12. So the intent of excluding universities or colleges, this section is really meant for the chapter itself is really addresses K through 12, but intent behind that language, you'd have to ask AOE.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So I'm just pointing out that subsection C is current law and there's no proposed amendments there for this draft. And so we're going to move to page 3. We're adding a brand new subdivision here, and it's a requirement that every year the Vermont School Safety Center and the Agency of Education review the reports submitted according to those subsections A and B for public schools and independent schools, and ensure compliance and identify future planning and training needs. So that's the amendments to this chapter. Everything else that's proposed is brand new. There was a lot of brand new language in there, but it was amending a current statute. So we're going to add section 2 is adding section 1480 to Title 16 entitled Emergency Operations Plans. We're on page 3, line 5. And it's a requirement that each supervisory union or supervisory district adopt an all hazards emergency operation plan that is at least as comprehensive as the template maintained by the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team. And the plan shall be updated on an annual basis, including collaboration with local emergency first responders and emergency management officials. And then subsection B is the requirement that the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team maintains that template.
Senator Hashim.
Quick question, the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, is that something that's already in existence, or would this bill, if enacted, create that team?
I think you have, no, it's already something that's in existence, and I think you have a witness coming from the School Safety Center who would be able to speak more about what that is.
Thank you.
But no, this bill does not create.
Thanks.
Is that accurate, Chair? Do you have?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Section 3, we're adding another section to this chapter in Title 16. We're adding section 1484. And so the philosophy here is we're adding section numbers, just kind of rolling with the numbers 1, 2, 3, fitting them in where it made sense to fit them in. So on line 15, page 3, subsection A, a requirement that each supervisory union or supervisory district shall adopt a policy that at a minimum requires all school sites and supervisory union and supervisory district offices, so those central offices, lock their exterior doors during the school day. The policy shall require that all visitors sign in at a centralized location prior to gaining full access to the school or office site. And then subsection B is the same requirement for approved independent schools. We're on page 4, line 1, the last section that this bill proposes to add to Title 16 is section 1485, entitled Behavioral Threat Assessment Teams. Each supervisory union or supervisory district and each approved independent school shall appoint a behavioral threat assessment team to be comprised of, at a minimum, administrators, mental health professionals, a school counselor, a school nurse, and local law enforcement officials. Members of the team shall be trained at least annually in best practices of conducting behavioral threat assessments. Superintendents and heads of independent schools shall report data related to behavioral threat assessment results to the agency. And then annually, the supervisory union, district, or approved independent school has to report the names of the people on that team.
Yes, Senator Williams.
So what if a municipality doesn't have a law enforcement organization? Any idea?
That this doesn't,
Okay.
it's a requirement to collaborate with local law enforcement, but it doesn't define what local law enforcement is.
Okay, thanks.
I think Dee Barrett can probably help us with some of that when she testifies.
And then the last section you will see in every bill, unless it's orphan language that you're just going to stick in someone else's bill, is an effective date section. This bill has several effective dates and they were proposed by AOE. So the first effective date is the effective date section, which shall take effect on July 1, 2023. And then the recommendation here is that sections 1 and 3 take effect on August 1st, 2023, and sections 2 and 4 take effect on July 1, 2024.
Any other questions for Ledge Council? I know you have
It actually got moved, so I'm not quite at the same.
just our first walk through the draft bill. We're going to hear from witnesses today, and then we have a number of witnesses coming in later this week, principals, superintendents, etc. And we'll work through it and see if something people proceed.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As soon as we have some, sorry. Yes, please. We have some new faces in the room also while we're waiting for the commissioner. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves.
Hi everyone, Lindsay Hedges, Agency of Education. I'm a policy communication specialist. You'll see either Ted or myself here pretty much every day.
Great to see you.
Jerome Netley, I'm a current graduate social work student at UVM. Also, I'm an internet pro consultant.
And where's that consulting from?
It's located in Montpelier. It's a consulting firm for social services agencies.
Great, okay, thank you.
I'm Celine Erickson with Vermont Emergency Management, and I am the lead administrator for the School Safety Center and co-chair of the School Crisis Planning Team.
Great, thanks.
I'm Dee Barwick, and I'm the Director of Violence Prevention.
Great, thank you all. Okay. Chief Morrison.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I guess we're in now.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. You know the bill that we are looking at. And so we're looking to hear your thoughts in general on school safety and the proposal before us.
Okay, well, thank you. And for the record, my name is Jennifer Morrison. I am the Commissioner of Public Safety. For the benefit of the committee, I wanted to just give some very high-level remarks and then turn you over to the capable hands of Dee and Sunny, who are the subject matter experts on this particular area. And I also wanted to start by thanking you for your hard work. I know it feels like it's just begun, but it's a lot of work, and we're all appreciative of all that you do. When we think about the School Safety Center, I think sometimes people think that there's a brick and mortar building that exists somewhere in Vermont, but that's just not the case. It is a construct where the Vermont Emergency Management, which is one of the divisions of the Department of Public Safety, partners with the Agency of Education, as well as the Vermont Intelligence Center, to create a resource and a website and staff expertise on Vermont school safety. But I just wanted to sort of lay the foundation that there's not an actual office somewhere that people could go to visit. I don't want to get into too much detail that Dee and Sunny are going to give to you, I wanted to quickly just say that Vermont Emergency Management, of course, is one of our divisions, but so is the Vermont State Police, which is home to the VIC, the Vermont Intelligence Center that I referenced just a moment ago. As well as within our purview, we have the Division of Fire Safety, which has only a little intersection to the bill in this work that we're talking about around school safety, in that they promulgate rules around fire drills and fire safety and other things that relate to school safety, but are not exactly in this wheelhouse. So there's at least 3 parts of the Department of Public Safety that intersect with this work. We are all supportive of the direction that this package of proposals is going. We also have the Radio Technology Shop, the Vermont Crime Information Center, the Vermont Forensic Lab, and the Finance and Administration Division. So those are the other parts of the Department of Public Safety, just to give you the landscape at the beginning of the session of the things that fall under our purview. I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sunny and Dee to introduce the proposals, and I will stay on the line to answer any questions that you might have of me, if that works for you.
Would you like to join us at the table? Sunny, please also as well. Nice to see you in person. rather than
You
Zoom.
as well. Thank you, sir.
And if you don't mind just introducing yourselves for the record, and floor is yours.
Sure. My name is Dee Bardick, and as I mentioned, I'm the Director of Violence Prevention for the state of Vermont.
And I'm Sunny Erickson with Vermont Emergency Management and the School Safety Grant Program Manager.
So first, thank you very much for taking the time to have us here today. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the proposals that Ledge Council had gone over a few minutes ago. As I mentioned, my position is the Director of Violence Prevention, and I work with the Violence Prevention Task Force. Just to give you a little bit of history, I'm retired from the Vermont State Police, where I spent a little over 26 years. And after that, I worked in the area of school safety for Margolis Healy, where I was the project manager for the Vermont School Safety Initiative in 2019 and 2020. And I'm currently completing my doctorate at the University of Vermont in educational leadership and policy development, with my focus on school safety. So the Violence Prevention Task Force was developed as part of the governor's 10-point public safety plan, and it's comprised.
Do you want us to start following along? We have your presentation, I believe.
That is.
Okay, we'll wait on that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, good, okay.
I didn't come with a PowerPoint.
Okay, all right.
So the Violence Prevention Task Force was developed as part of the governor's 10-point public safety plan. And it's comprised of the secretaries of the Agency of Human Services, Digital Services, and the Agency of Education, as well as the commissioners of mental health, children and families, public safety, corrections, and the Department of Health. We also, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, as well as the Attorney General's Office, also are part of the task force. So we work very closely across state government, and we've developed a larger policy package of safety initiatives. And this school safety is one section of that larger package, which is what we're here to chat with you about today. I believe Secretary French had testified roughly 2 weeks, a week and a half or so ago. And then Ledge Council has just had an opportunity to run through the language of the school safety portion of our package. You have clearly seen that there's 4 specific areas that we're addressing related to school safety. And I would first ask if there were any questions you had about any of those particular 4 sections before I go any
I think
further.
the one question that I noted was the question about options-based responses. You could say
Okay.
something about
I can go into that a little bit, and I think Sunny is prepared to go into that more broadly. You know, we're really in the world of school safety, we're moving away from just a lockdown to a threat or school emergency, and we're moving to an options-based approach. And what that does is, you know, the environment in school safety is changing all the time, And not every situation is going to be met, where a lockdown is going to appropriately meet the needs of that given situation. So we're transitioning away from that and into the options-based methodology, which provides a variety of options to choose from depending on the dynamics that are unfolding in a given situation. And again, Sunny can speak more about that, but again, options-based is exactly like it says. Instead of just being given one option, lockdown, you may run, hide, fight is an example where an option may be to run in a given situation. It may be to hide, it may be to fight. Again, it trains in choices and what is the best choice to make in a given situation.
May I just ask, and this might be Sunny, feel free to punt it, who would be making those decisions in the schools at that moment? In terms of which option from which to choose?
So in the classrooms, teachers would be making those decisions. And again, it would depend on where they are in the building and where the threat is in the building.
Okay.
So it would change. It wouldn't be like the entire school is going to choose the option to run or the option to hide. It really depends on, again, where they are in the school, in the building, and what the situation is at that exact moment in time. I did want to touch on the behavioral threat assessment team portion of the policy package and just go into a little bit of information about that. Oftentimes folks aren't familiar with behavioral threat assessments, so I just wanted to describe that a little bit. They're basically an assessment and management process as a preventative approach to threats and acts of violence, with the primary goal being to assess and then manage a situation or potential situation that might develop. The effort is to enhance the safety of the individual and the well-being of everyone involved, including the school, the individual concerned, the situation in the school community at large. Again, this approach is to identify concerning behavior and provide services to an individual, which may include counseling, mental health support, mentoring, other resources that are available, but basically to provide supports rather than the zero tolerance approach that has historically been used. And as part of a broader school safety approach with a caring and collaborative school community. So it's, again, I just wanted to sort of give you an overview of what that approach is all about. And when the team was mentioned, who's going to comprise these behavioral threat assessment teams, probably picked up that it's a wide variety of individual school administrators, mental health counselors, nurses, school counselors, and law enforcement. And the idea is to bring in a multidisciplinary approach to a given situation. And that allows people from different perspectives to bring their expertise to that situation, that condition, and identify what are the next best steps we can take. And, again, I mentioned it could be mental health counseling for an individual. It could be other support services. But again, this is to identify a potential threat before it evolves to an actual threat. Yes.
And this is always someone who's in the school building. Is that correct? Or is it the school community at large?
The proposal that we put forward is identify school districts and supervisory unions. So what this proposal would be is that not every single school would have to have its own team. It could be a school team, but it could also be a district or supervisory wide team. And again, that's in keeping in two things in mind, really. One is that not every school will have the capacity to have a team. So we have said, okay, a school district team may be in some cases a better option. But in a lot of our communities too, we see that our school district, we have very tight school communities. We're very fortunate in Vermont to have that. And oftentimes the districts are very familiar with, families and kids and what's going on in the greater school community. So I think, in our very specific area in Vermont, we're fortunate to have those close-knit school communities. And that I believe allows us to have these teams be district-wide or supervisory union-wide.
Senator Hashima and Senator Bloom.
I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but line 7, could you just tell me what the best practices are? I'm just reading that members of the team shall be trained at least annually in best practices, and just wondering what the best practices are and where they come from.
I'll turn it over to Sunny to talk more in detail of that.
So we are, through the School Safety Center, we have been offering for the last year and a half or 2 years, behavioral threat assessment, awareness level, introductory training. And that's, we've partnered with a contractor who is a national thought leader. It was formerly known as Sigma Threat Management. Now they've merged with OnTIC Technologies. And the folks that run those programs and are providing that training to educators throughout the state, and those have been virtual due to the pandemic. They have been in the Secret Service as the head psychology folks. They've been really immersed in behavioral threat assessment and how beneficial that can be for decades. And so we are, partnered with these thought leaders, and they bring to those trainings what they have identified as the best practices and who should be at the, at the table for those behavioral threat assessments, what you should be looking for, what to identify as really concerning behaviors, or what just might be something that's worth mentioning, but doesn't really need to be fully investigated. So the folks that we have contracted with that are delivering these trainings are the ones who are coming to the table with the best practices. And those can be evolving as, as school safety, the evolution is very quick and changes, it feels like almost on a weekly basis. And if new practices pop up as we move along, then they will bring those into the trainings as well.
Great to know. Thank you.
Did you consider bringing emergency management coordinators or directors into this from municipalities?
Actually, for the behavioral threat assessment, trainings are open to anyone. So we have law enforcement, is for resource officers. It can be, folks from a township or a municipality. It is open to anyone who is an interested in this stakeholder in the communities. We encourage as many people to participate as possible, because that's only going to strengthen your community responses.
Please continue.
Again, this is just an overview of our proposals, and Ledge Council was able to go into the specific language on those sections. I would actually, unless anyone has any questions for me, I can turn it over to Sunny, and she has a presentation.
Great.
Let me just grab my laptop. I see that you folks have printouts, so that's wonderful.
We do. It'd be great if probably bring it up also.
Okay.
Yeah, that way. Yeah.
So while we're getting settled.
Yeah. You have a question for Dee?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just so while your colleague is getting set up, curious on page 3, the emergency operations plans. Is the intent like to draft a template that each school then tailors to its own physical facilities and staffing levels and what have you?
Yeah,
What's the level of effort following the introduction of the plan?
So the template already exists. It's been developed and it is available on the Vermont School Safety website, and it is being utilized by some schools. But this would encourage all schools to be on the same template, the same format for their emergency operations plan.
Is there then a follow-up kind of validation that they're doing it, or they've tailored it appropriately? Is there a subject matter expert that says, hey, you got it? Or
That would be through the Vermont School Safety Center.
okay, right, very good. Thank you.
Is there a button in which I can move that along, or should I just?
If Nathan doesn't mind, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm Sunny Erickson, with Vermont Emergency Management, and in charge and overseeing a number of school safety initiatives and programs through the School Safety Center. And as I mentioned earlier, I work very closely as the co-chair with the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team. And I thought that what we could do is go over some of the current safety programs that are ongoing right now, and Then if there's any questions on, previous work that's led up to where we are now or future plans, we can chat about that afterwards.
And Cindy, while you're doing that, if you don't mind telling us which ones are kind of required, which ones are optional, that sort of thing.
Oh, okay, what do you mean by optional? I'm sorry.
Well, we do, we would be, as I understand it from Secretary French, we're taking some different programs that are happening throughout the state right now and making them required. So it sounds like there's some opt-in, some, options there right now in some of our schools.
Okay.
But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not incorrect with that assumption, because as the draft language, proposes, there are requirements for behavioral threat assessment, including having to take some of the trainings and reporting back on, who's on the team and that they're confirming their training requirements have been met and things like that. So those would be overseen by AOE, but they are proposed to be requirements for each of the schools. The training programs that we offer are open to any educators within the state, K through 12, grade wise. And any of the trainings are free of charge, but are not specific requirements, I guess is the best way to describe them. Eventually, behavioral threat assessment may be a requirement to be, to have the training to be on a team, but the other trainings that we have are not things that are required, as far as I know, by individual school districts or supervisory unions. And all of these things fall under the purview of the School Safety Center. So we'll talk about that a little bit first, because I'm not sure that how familiar any of you are with it. And if you are familiar with some of the stuff, we can skip ahead. Can we move to the next slide up here? Thank you. So the School Safety Center, as Commissioner Morrison had noted, when you think of that, you think of a building you can go to with people, bustling around doing school safety work. In some states, that is the case, but in Vermont, as the Commissioner noted, it is a resource center, an information clearinghouse, a place where you can go for templates. You can get online training information there. There's tabletop exercises that the planning teams in the schools can download and run through on their, weekly or monthly meetings with their teams. There's a lot of really wonderful information that's housed there. And the School Safety Center has been around since 2016. It's a partnership between AOE and DPS. It's manned by myself and my colleague Rob Evans from the Agency of Education, and he's the School Safety Liaison Officer. And we co-chair the school crisis planning team, which helps put out the guidance and the templates and the recommendations through the Safety Center. So our goal in the Safety Center is to promote preparedness measures, get folks as much training as they can, work on emergency operations plans, all hazard approaches to planning. We work with, counselors and teachers and principals and superintendents, really the whole spectrum of folks that are immersed in the education world. And we provide the best practices and recommendations, and those do change pretty often. So we are constantly doing some outreach for, the best practices as they are, as they come about. Next slide, please. Thank you. And here on this slide is listed some of the services that we provide through the Safety Center. As Dee had mentioned, we do a lot of planning, training, and exercise assistance. Actually, that's how I first met Dee, when she was running the planning, training, and exercise emergency operation plan development training through the School Safety Center. And now the template that came out of that is available for folks to use as they're doing their own emergency operations planning, both on the individual school level and at the district and supervisory union level. We also put out planning guidance, the drill guidance, as we work with the fire safety division to make sure, we're putting out information that is, safe in the time in which that guidance is issued. So with COVID, we had to go back, and you couldn't have large people gathering. We had to alter that guidance for egress drills and bus evacuation drills, which are required on a yearly basis. So some of those changed based on the situation that we find ourselves in the world. And the school safety center is the one that promotes that and pushes that information out. We also have information for parents and guardians for how they can respond in emergency situations. And we give some templates there for schools to communicate with parents and guardians. We work on crisis communication and offer crisis communication classes for schools that may need to be issuing some of these communications in times of high stress to help them, figure out how to get that information out there. We also work on the technical assistance side. There's about 448 schools in Vermont, and a lot of them, especially in recent months, have been asking for individual audits and assessments of their physical security. So what we would do is, as long as we have the capacity to do so, we will go out, and it takes about half a day to walk through a school to measure and assess their infrastructure, their locking mechanisms, their public announcement system, their camera use, their lighting use on the outside of the buildings, things that are really important, but I feel like there's always something that can be done in most schools. And so when we are able to, we are out in the field doing those assessments and audits as well. But
I'd like to pause there for a moment while we're on the school construction topic.
Mhm.
So the state of Vermont is likely to make a big investment in school construction over the next several years, hopefully sooner rather than later. When new buildings go up, when things happen, are you looking to require certain things? For example, safer glass in case a wind or a weather event or a gun, or anything like, were to sort of come through that region, a shopping, but anything like that being looked at or examined as new construction pops up? Does that make sense, or?
I would say that there's recommended measures.
Okay.
There's like film that you can put over windows that is shatterproof for,
But I guess
purposes
maybe
like that.
it's more of a FYI. I know this committee, and I think the legislature in general is looking to improve our school buildings and
Mhm.
really start some new construction. So I hate for us to then say, after the building's up, not that anybody really would, but gosh, given some climate issues, we never put in these kinds of things. And I'm wondering if that's what we could look to all of you for some recommendations on that kind of, again, as new buildings are going up, this is what should be done.
Yeah, right. And I think we would look to AOE to follow what some of their thoughts would be and some of their metrics that they would hope the new constructions would meet. And
Okay.
I believe that they would also be including public safety in some of those conversations,
Okay.
just because they're subject matter
Okay.
experts in safety.
Yeah.
But right now, there's not, as far as I know, I don't think there's any requirements being pushed out for new construction, but it might be conversations that I'm not, a part of at this point.
Thank you.
I guess the last piece on this slide is just the emergency operation plan development. I know we give trainings, exercises. I was just doing an options-based response training for 7 different schools down in the Bellows Falls area. We do a number of trainings based on, the requests and our ability to get to those certain regions of the state. But we are trying really hard to offer as many trainings and exercises as we possibly can. And we can go to the next slide. This is just an overview of the school crisis planning team. You had asked if it was something that's newly formed. It's a team that's been around for quite a long time at this point. Basically, it's wonderfully devoted representatives from a number of state agencies, principals association, superintendents association. We have the chief of police, the police association. We have representatives from the Vermont State Police as well. We have 211, American Red Cross, mental health folks, school counselors. We all sit around a table, well, it's a virtual table at this point, once a month, and we talk about the things that are going on, current trends. We talk about what guidance might need to change, what trainings we'd like to bring in the future. And that's where the recommendations that we put out for our standards and best practices and our operational guidance, that all comes with after having gotten the approval from the school crisis planning team. And Dee is also on that team with us as well. Is there any questions about school crisis planning team? As the Secretary French was here recently talking about this, and we were hearing about it a little bit earlier. The Department of Public Safety has been working closely, and myself, Dee, and Rob Evans with AOE. We've been working with the Legislative Council from AOE on drafting some of this language. We've presented it to the school crisis planning team and provided the feedback that they gave to that draft language back to the Agency of Education. We're excited to have some of these focuses perhaps become, mandated and inscribed in statute. So I'm very excited about what this could look like in the future. And those four places that we mostly focused our energy on was the access control, the emergency operation plan development, the drills, and the behavioral threat assessment. Each of those have been things that the School Safety Center has been working on for a number of years with the school safety grant program with the governor. For 2 years, 2 consecutive years, he invested 4.1 and then $1.5 million in the infrastructure. A lot of that went to access control with notification systems, lighting, cameras, blocking mechanisms. The emergency operation plans, we've had, Dee and her group giving trainings and exercises in association with emergency operations. We've been working on the drill pieces and that changing guidance in the face of the pandemic for a while. And now we have the current behavioral threat assessment program that's up and running. We've trained over 300 educators in the state. Actually tomorrow and then the following day, we have a train the trainer session, a 2-day session that we're trying to build up the capacity of folks that can go out and work with the individual teams. And we have our first train the trainer session starting tomorrow. And that's very exciting as well. So all of these areas that are now being, drafted with their language, these are all near and dear to our hearts. And we've had programs that are working towards this goal for a number of years. So it's very exciting that these things are being talked about now in this room. Go to the next slide. We are very excited to have partnered with the U.S. Department of Education. They have a Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools program. We are bringing them up in April to meet with Vermont educators to work on the federal recommendations for emergency operations plans and developing those. We are currently working to identify where we're going to hold that, but we have committed, we have made a commitment to provide that in April to our education stakeholders, and that's very exciting. We haven't had the U.S. Department of Education present or provide one of these trainings, I think, in about 6 or 7 years. So we've had our state level ones. This is bringing in the federal government to provide some additional guidance, which is very exciting. The next slide is the options-based response training. We spoke a little bit about this. Dee did a really good job of covering what that really means. And historically, the lockdown mode has been the mode to go to in the case of an emergency. Locks lights out of sight is sort of the motto for that, where you lock the door, shut the lights off, and sort of hunker down. We're moving away from that because sometimes that's not the best option, and providing educators and administrators with the idea that there's not just one universal response mechanism that empowers them to make other decisions that could save lives or prevent injury. We have been traveling around through this partnership with the state police and the school safety center. We traveled throughout the state and provided 10 options-based response trainings with a partnership with the Vermont State Police, and we held those in schools throughout the state in the month of August. You may have heard of ALICE training. ALICE training is another way, another options-based response training, follows pretty much the same ideas of run, hide, fight, except run, hide, fight is sort of an easier to recall in the moment approach to options-based response training, much like stop, drop, and roll is something you all can recall from probably kindergarten or first grade. So we have trained with options-based response training. I think we were at about 400 folks in attendance over the 1 month, and we've provided that same training at the Vermont Emergency Preparedness Conference, we spoke about it at the Governor's School Safety Conference, and we've provided a couple of those to educators during the in-service day trainings throughout the state as well. And we can move to the next slide. Thank you. You are doing a really great job. Speaking about our behavioral threat assessment program, we did mention, some pieces of this earlier. This was initiated through a Department of Justice award. We got over $350,000. We partnered with Sigma, now Sigma Ontic, and have been offering these trainings for the last year and a half. Our next train the trainer session, it starts tomorrow and the next day. And we were also recently awarded an additional $250,000 through the Vermont Department of Homeland Security, which will allow us to continue offering these behavioral threat assessment trainings and additional train the trainer sessions in the future. So we just were awarded that about a month ago, and we're excited to be able to continue that because we do have the additional funding source, and that's a 2-year grant. So we'll be offering those trainings and the train the trainer sessions for the next couple of years as well. And the last slide is just an overview of the current challenges that you folks will probably hear about as you, talk about school safety. These are things that are popping up on our monthly calls with the school crisis planning team. Actually, in most of my conversations with any educator in whatever role they happen to be in, these are the things that are popping up. The student behaviors coming out of pandemic, there's a rise, a severe increase in outbursts of violence with students, and they're seeing it in younger students too. You will find some of these behaviors that are very concerning in elementary school, where you typically in the past would not have seen this, and that could be part of the isolation from pandemic and the social, impacts from that. But we're seeing it across the spectrum, K through 12. There's a lot of behavior challenges right now, an incredible lack of mental health resources that could help assist with some of those behaviors. And when they go to seek assistance with local agencies, they might not have anyone available for a number of months. And so that's troubling as well. I feel like educators are so busy doing the things on their daily basis. Future planning is somewhat difficult. There's funding needs as always, and we do want to be encouraging in the future more emergency management and emergency planning collaboration with first responders. As emergency operations plans are being developed, if you provide like a map of your school to your fire department and your police department, that's only going to strengthen their ability to respond, because you can say, I'm in this room, in this wing of a building, and they'll have that map right there. So having those collaborations and that rapport with first responders is really important. And again, the options-based response initiative, just giving folks in the education community the ability to have a number of options in order to address and respond and protect themselves. Those are the things that we've identified as really needing some focus, and hopefully some of our programs and endeavors and initiatives will do that.
Are you seeing an uptick in threats against schools in Vermont right now? Or has it been, can you say a little bit about that?
Sure.
And also just to elaborate, from within the school or externally?
Well, I would say that I believe that they are on the increase. We partner.
You collect data on that.
Right. So the Vermont Intelligence Center, they are the ones that oversee the anonymous tip line. They are the ones who receive through either the portal, which is able to be reported, phone, text, email. They do track that data, and I would say that with pretty good confidence that they'd probably say that they're seeing an increase in threats that are being reported or detected. There's also a subcommittee that reviews after the information center receives the threatening information. They do an investigation on their own. If it's deemed credible, there's a subcommittee of school crisis planning team members and emergency management personnel that all will get together to figure out the best response and how to move forward with addressing the concern. I think that the data would, I'm positive, show that there's more threats happening. I know that I'm seeing a lot more of them come across, my email and my phone.
And then if I were asked talking to parents this weekend during the legislative breakfast, could I confidently say that this plan is going to make things safer, and how compared to what's there now?
Do you mean the
The
plan?
bill itself, in your opinion, is it just the coordination? Is it what's gonna really make the schools safer?
A lot of anecdotally, a lot of some of the things that we've been hearing is that schools are looking for guidance. There are a ton of resources, as Sunny had mentioned, through the Vermont School Safety Center, all fantastic information, but they're looking for more specific guidance, like what kind of training for behavioral threat assessment teams, what is visitor management? What should we be doing for visitor management? What kinds of drills should we be doing? So I feel like this is the first step to providing them that guidance and those guardrails, so they know where to go. And again, touching on what Sunny mentioned earlier is, we ask an awful lot of our schools, and I would say that probably most teachers and educators didn't get into education because they wanted to develop emergency operations plans, yet this is the world that we live in. So in trying to give them all the supports that we can, build the capacity so that they're able to do that, build the capacity for the behavioral threat assessment teams, with the understanding that it's providing training, the capacity and guidance for them to make the best decisions that they can.
Senator Wood.
Thank you, Chair. So the behavioral threat assessment team, I guess this is sort of piggybacking on my initial question. I assumed it was sort of school-based, because I can totally imagine in my mind, if you've got a threat within the school, how you would handle that. Where I can't quite, what I don't understand is if there's a person in a community outside of the school that might be posing a threat, what does that look like? How do you proactively identify and deal with that person? And it's obviously, I don't know a lot about law enforcement, so law enforcement might already have tactics or protocols around that. But can you speak a little bit to that? If there is a threat that a known potential threat outside of a building, how you handle that? Because I think that's in here, right? Part of the work of the behavioral threat assessment team.
I see Chief Morrison's hand is up also. I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on this. Actually, I didn't notice, Hayden noticed, but.
Thank you. I wanted to put some context on the numbers of threats, and I have the luxury of being at my keyboard, so I can pull some stuff up. So when we're talking about the number of school threats reported to the VIC in all of 2022, we're talking about 26. And the number of tips that came in on the school tip line over the course of 2022 were 4. So we're not talking about huge numbers. In the first 20 days of 2023, there were 3 school threats reported to the VIC. So I guess if you take that and say that sounds like about 1 a week, that perhaps we could extrapolate that there would be 52, which would be double the 22 numbers. But I think it's too soon to say. These things tend to go in fits and spurts depending on the school year calendar. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context that we're not talking about huge numbers to those. And to the question about how we handle threats that are generated by external actors who make a threat against a school facility, that is another area of collaboration where when the information becomes known, that we work with the school to make them aware of the threat or challenge, and so that they can do any target hardening or appropriate actions. Maybe that's a notice of trespass against the person who's making the threat. But of course, law enforcement has a specific role to gather information and determine if it's a credible threat or not. And if it rises to the level of prosecution versus perhaps not to that level. And again, a notice of trespass is the only appropriate mechanism at that time. But all threats to a school are reported through the Vermont Intelligence Center, or are supposed to be. Let me leave that right there, for the very purpose of being able to track them and provide the context that I just provided to you. And then each threat or threatening situation is evaluated individually. Each one is evaluated on the totality of the circumstances, on how specific the threat was, on whether the person took any overt action towards carrying out said threat. And there's a lot that goes into that to determine if it's a threat that generates prosecution versus other supports being provided. Similar to what Dee was mentioning about how a behavioral threat assessment is designed to identify behaviors and then provide interventions and supports to the person exhibiting those behaviors before criminal justice system involvement. It's not all that dissimilar from if the threatening actor is outside the school environment, that we would seek to try and provide supports through mental health workers or other methods to bring that person to a place where they are no longer threatening a school environment in that way. Does that answer your question, or both of your questions?
Thank you, yes.
Chief Morrison, if we were to, as a committee, have somebody in that could talk to us about other things that are being done, and I'm also recognize that the Vice Chair of Judiciary, Senator Hashim, is on this committee, but to give everyone an understanding of what's happening outside of the school day, whether it's the red flag law or other kinds of pieces of legislation that intersects with this kind of work. Maybe you could give some thought to that. I could certainly talk to Senator Hashim and Senator Sears, just so everybody understands what else is happening out there. And I do suspect once we finish with this bill, we'll probably go down to judiciary at least for a look at some point.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'd be happy to collaborate with you in any way that is useful to you, and in order to contextualize the bigger environmental picture, because of course, schools are not silos alone in our communities,
That's
right?
Right.
And if there's violence and outbursts, as Dee or Sunny or one of them was talking about, the frequency and severity of outbursts and behavioral violent behaviors that are being exhibited as low as our elementary schools, if that is happening there, then there are clearly intersections with what is happening in the home, what is happening in the broader community, where do we need to bring supports in to intervene and interrupt these cycles before they become involved with the criminal justice system. And so we make, hopefully, them a healthier, happier person or family, and prevent people from being involved in the criminal justice system or harming others.
Yeah, it just as an example, several of us had meetings with our hospitals this week over violence that was being seen in the emergency rooms. I know that the governor put some money in the budget to help deal with that. Just another sort of group out there, nurses, physicians, others having to deal with increased violence. Senator Williams.
I'd like to encourage you to include somebody from the municipality into your response team. We had an example of a town in our district where they had a lockdown of the school and there was some drug activity next door. And the phone started ringing off the wall at the town office. And they didn't know anything about what was going on, and they couldn't field the call. So how do you deal with media and communications? Is that all part of the training for the assessment team?
So that would be part of the emergency operations plan, the all hazards emergency operations plan. And there are different sections on how to deal with a variety of hazards. You know, it could be, a chemical leak in the chemistry lab. It could be no electricity, or a school bus goes off the road. So that would be part of, and, could be an appendix to the emergency operations plan. And again, it's all hazards, so that would fall within. And as we mentioned earlier, the approach we're looking for, and as it's the language is written now, is to involve local emergency management as part of looking at that plan and being a part of that plan, because just as you mentioned, that is really important in a lot of mutual responses to various hazards.
So we are going to hear from our educational partners this week. They'll testify on this. We'll also hear from, there's a national organization out there that looks at education issues. I'm going to ask them just to say, tell us a little bit of what's happening in other states. Are we pushing things, far enough ahead, or are there other states that are maybe doing more? And that could be something you all also could weigh in on it. And yeah, we'll continue to work on it. I suspect we'll get something out, sometime in February.
Good time for one more.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
So I applaud what you're doing, a phenomenal activity. Question on the emergency operations plan, just because I'm kind of new into this arena. I understand when a school has a situation where the issue is inside the school, or it's a threat to the school. What about, to the chairman's point, half hour ago or so, about natural disasters in the area where the school becomes more of a focal point for response, as opposed to, experiencing a threat inside. And I just curious if the emergency operations plan considers how the school is utilized in a community-wide scenario.
In the sense that the school will be used as maybe a warming shelter
Exactly.
or
As
something
an
like that?
example,
Okay, that can definitely be worked into the plan. And again, the template of the plan allows for flexibility,
Okay.
because in some communities that may be the designated, warming shelter or other, it may be used for other purposes in an emergency. So in those cases where towns do utilize those schools for those purposes, it should be part of that emergency.
So it is part of the template, or
It should be part of the town plan.
Right,
but the
right.
school-
The emergency, the regional emergency management plans, those already exist.
It's helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's probably memorandums of understanding between the school and the community that would establish it for an alternative shelter or something along those lines, whatever it needs to be.
Okay, thank you.
That's where the importance between the local emergency management director and the school, that relationship is really important.
Many thanks to all three of you. Really appreciate it. I think we're off to a good start.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
thanks.
Thank you.
Committee, let's just take 5
Thank you.
minutes.
Have a good day.
Hear from Ms. Samuelson. Does that work for you, Jennifer? Okay, great.